I found out my parents gave control of the family business to my sister-in-law. So I walked away from the endless hours and stress. A week later, Dad called in panic. "We're losing our biggest client." I calmly said, "Let her fix it. She's the one running things now." I'm Nathan, 40 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the one quietly holding together the family business. It's a modest commercial printing company founded by my parents over 40 years ago. Nothing flashy, but solid enough to keep a roof over our heads and pay the bills. Growing up, my parents always made it clear that the business was our legacy, something we all needed to protect and nurture. That was part of why I never really questioned jumping in right after college, even though I had other ideas for my career. I felt a sense of duty. My brother Marcus wasn't really involved much, more interested in his own world, so the responsibility mostly fell on me. For years, it was just me, my parents, and a small team. I put in the hours no one else wanted: weekends, late nights, client calls that ran into dinner time. It was stressful and exhausting, but I believed in it. I thought my parents appreciated what I was doing. Then Marcus got married to Olivia. Olivia was complicated. She came from a wealthy background, never worked a day in her life before marrying into our family. From the start, she acted like she was the boss, even though she had no experience in printing, sales, or managing. At first, I tried to be polite. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe she just wanted to help. But over time, it got worse. Olivia started undermining me with the staff, second-guessing decisions, trying to rebrand things without consulting anyone, and generally making my job impossible. My parents, instead of stepping in, seemed to side with her or just stay quiet. I remember one meeting where I suggested a new client outreach plan that had worked for years. Olivia scoffed and said, "Nathan, that's so old-fashioned. We need fresh ideas, not these tired tactics." No one defended me. The tipping point came when I found out, not from my parents, not from Olivia, but from a family friend, that they had officially handed control of the business to Olivia. Just like that. No warning, no discussion with me. I called Dad, my voice tight with disbelief. "Why would you do this without even telling me?" I asked. He said, "We thought it was time for a change. Olivia's eager and has new ideas. You've been so tied up with day-to-day operations, we wanted to try a different approach." I was stunned. 15 years of blood, sweat, and late nights meant nothing. They'd handed the reins to someone who had barely earned the trust of anyone in the company. I didn't want to fight it. Honestly, I was worn out. So I told them I was stepping away, focusing on something else, away from the stress and endless hours that seemed to go unappreciated. Walking away felt strange. I'd built my identity around this business. But I also felt a strange sense of relief. Let Olivia deal with the mess she created. Then, about a week later, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice wasn't calm, it was panicked. "We're losing our biggest client, Nathan. Olivia mishandled their account. They're threatening to pull out." I leaned back in my chair, holding the phone steady. "Let her fix it," I said quietly. "She's the one running things now." After that call from Dad, I expected things to get messy. What I didn't expect was how quickly the entire company would begin to unravel under Olivia's control and how my parents, especially Dad, would disappear into denial, leaving me to watch from the sidelines as everything I'd fought for started to crumble. In the days following Dad's call, I stayed in touch with a few longtime employees I trusted, mostly under the radar. I needed to understand what was really going on inside the company now that Olivia was at the helm. What I heard confirmed every bad feeling I had. Olivia wasn't just inexperienced, she was reckless. She'd alienated the key account managers, micromanaged client relationships without knowing the business, and made promises she couldn't keep just to look good. It wasn't just the printing side either. She brought in a consultant who pushed her to cut corners to boost profit margins, ignoring quality and customer service. One employee confided to me, "Nathan, the mood here is terrible. People are worried. Some have already started looking elsewhere." The biggest client, a regional retail chain we'd worked with for over a decade, had complained about missed deadlines and poor communication. Olivia tried to handle the situation herself, but without the experience or the relationships, she only made things worse. I wanted to step back in, offer help, or at least advice. But when I reached out to my parents, especially Dad, I was met with coldness and resistance. At one point, Dad said to me over the phone, "Nathan, this is Olivia's project now. We don't want you interfering." You walked away. That line stung more than I expected. I had poured years of my life into that company, and now they treated me like an outsider. Meanwhile, Marcus, my older brother, had been almost completely absent. He left all family business matters to Olivia and made no effort to support me. Whenever I brought up concerns, Marcus brushed me off with vague promises of handling it behind the scenes, but nothing ever came of it. At family gatherings, Olivia would make pointed comments about how the old ways couldn't run the company anymore, how I was stuck in the past and needed to get with the times. She'd smirk and say things like, if Nathan had any sense, he'd be grateful I'm cleaning up his mess. The worst was how my parents seemed to lap up everything Olivia said, never questioning her intentions or capabilities. It was clear they were under her influence, or maybe just eager to see something new after years of what they called Nathan's stubbornness. One evening, I sat down with my mom. I hoped for at least some support or an honest conversation. Instead, she laid it all out coldly. We appreciate what you did, Nathan. You worked hard. But Olivia has vision. She's the one who can take us forward. You need to accept that and find your own path. Her tone was polite but firm. There was no room for debate. I asked her, doesn't that feel like a betrayal? You didn't even talk to me before handing over control. Mom shrugged. Sometimes, you have to make difficult decisions for the good of the family. We did what we thought was best. I realized then how deep the divide was. This wasn't just about a business. It was about power and control, about Olivia's influence over my parents, and their blindness to what that really meant. I was cut out, and it felt deliberate. The company's atmosphere worsened as the weeks passed. Longtime employees were leaving, clients kept pulling out, and Olivia's aggressive style only escalated. She started demanding constant reports and unreasonable deadlines, blaming others for mistakes she made. She fired a few senior managers who resisted her changes, replacing them with younger people who had no experience but answered directly to her. Rumors started to spread that Olivia was pushing to sell off parts of the company to pay for lavish personal expenses, a new car, a house renovation, expensive vacations, all under the guise of investment. My parents, for some reason, turned a blind eye. One night, I got a call from one of my oldest friends in the company, a man named Jack who had been with us for 20 years. Nathan, he said, voice low, I don't know how much longer this place can survive. Olivia is running it into the ground, and your parents aren't stepping in. It's like they don't care anymore. Jack's words were heartbreaking. This was more than a business to me. It was my family's legacy, and now it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I tried to warn my parents again. Dad, this isn't just a rough patch. Olivia's decisions are costing us everything we worked for. You need to step in before it's too late. His reply was icy. I'm not going to undermine her. This is her responsibility now. You chose to walk away. That was the moment I realized my family had turned against me. I was the one who'd kept the company afloat through tough times, and yet now, when I tried to help, they shut me out. I started to pull back even more, focusing on building something outside the family business. At least there, I could control my own future. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been pushed out on purpose, not because they trusted Olivia, but because they wanted me gone. And then came the call that changed everything. Dad sounded frantic. We just lost the retail chain's contract. Olivia tried to handle the negotiations herself. She promised terms that the client couldn't accept. And they're gone. Nathan, we're bleeding money fast. I didn't even try to hide my reaction. For a moment, I just sat in silence. Finally, I said, let her fix it. After all, she's the one running the show now. The next few days were a whirlwind of texts, calls, and quiet observations from the sidelines. Olivia tried desperately to save face, launching last-minute marketing campaigns, scrambling for new clients, and blaming anyone who questioned her. The company felt like it was drowning, and no one seemed willing to throw it a lifeline. After that call from Dad about losing the retail chain, I spent a long time just sitting quietly, staring at the phone. It was hard to believe how far things had fallen in such a short time. This wasn't just a business anymore. It felt like a family imploding, piece by piece. And somehow, I was the outsider looking in at the wreckage. The company was never just a business to me. It was a legacy, my parents' life's work, something I had sacrificed so much for without complaint. I knew every nook and cranny of the operation, every client relationship, every employee's strengths and weaknesses. I had built those relationships, kept the business steady through economic downturns, technological shifts, and more. But now, all of that seemed meaningless. Olivia had come in with her self-assured smirk and flashy ideas, and my parents had handed her the reins without so much as a conversation. What made it worse was how quickly the people I'd trusted started disappearing. One by one, longtime employees left or were pushed out. Some I spoke to told me privately that the atmosphere had become toxic under Olivia's reign, a constant barrage of impossible demands, public humiliations, and a lack of respect for anyone who disagreed. Jack, the friend I mentioned before, was one of the last senior managers still holding on. When I met him for coffee one afternoon, the weariness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Nathan, it's like watching a slow-motion disaster," he said quietly. "People are scared to speak up. She makes examples out of anyone who steps out of line. And your parents? They don't want to see it. They think everything's fine because Olivia tells them what they want to hear." I nodded, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. "Have you tried talking to them?" "To Dad." Jack sighed. "More than once. But they've made their choice. They trust Olivia over you, and they're convinced she's the future. The fact that my own parents could be so blind, or maybe so willing to turn a blind eye, hurt more than I cared to admit. Mom, especially, had always been the glue holding things together, but now she was distant, cold, and oddly defensive when the topic came up. One evening, I stopped by the house unexpectedly, hoping to have a heart-to-heart. I found her in the kitchen, going through paperwork. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked cautiously. She looked up, startled. "Nathan, I'm busy. I just want to understand. Why Olivia? Why now? After everything I've done." She sighed, putting the papers down. "It's not about what you've done. It's about what Olivia can do. We need new blood, new energy. You've been stuck in the past for too long." Her words hit like a slap. It wasn't just Olivia they believed in. It was the idea of change, regardless of the cost. It became clear Olivia wasn't just running the business badly. She was actively reshaping it to her advantage. The lavish personal expenses I'd heard whispers about were no secret anymore. Jack confirmed she'd convinced my parents to approve costly upgrades to the office space, including a pricey art installation that had nothing to do with printing. "She's spending money like it grows on trees," Jack said, shaking his head. "And the worst part? She's convincing your parents these are necessary investments." The fallout from losing the retail chain rippled through everything. Without that steady income, cash flow tightened. Suppliers got nervous. Creditors started calling. And Olivia's response was to blame everyone but herself. She held a company-wide meeting one morning. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from staff. People were scared, Jack told me later. Olivia stood up and said the old guard was holding us back, that if anyone wasn't on board with her vision, they were part of the problem. She singled out a few employees who dared to question her. It was humiliating. Meanwhile, my parents refused to intervene. When I tried calling Dad again, his answers were clipped and dismissive. "I'm not going to fight this battle for you, Nathan," he said. "Olivia is running things now. You chose to walk away. If you want back in, you'll have to talk to her." That last line felt like a punch in the gut. I realized I wasn't just cut out of the business. I was cut out of the family's heart. At the next family dinner, a tense, uncomfortable affair, Olivia was in her element. She took over the conversation, telling everyone about her plans to expand the company into new markets, to modernize everything. I tried to speak up, to point out some of the risks I'd seen firsthand. Marcus gave me a warning look. Mom changed the subject quickly. Olivia smiled smugly and said, "Nathan's stuck in the past. Sometimes you have to take risks to grow." I left that dinner feeling more alone than ever. But something inside me was shifting. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything without a fight. I started quietly documenting everything. The bad decisions, the wasteful spending, the way Olivia was alienating clients and employees. I reached out to former clients to hear their side of the story. What I found was a pattern of broken promises, rushed jobs, and careless mistakes, all blamed on an overwhelmed staff under new management. One afternoon, Jack sent me a message. "Nathan, I think you need to see this." He'd managed to get hold of an email Olivia had sent to one of the biggest suppliers. The tone was demanding, entitled, and dismissive, threatening to pull all orders unless they dropped prices immediately. The supplier had refused and warned that if Olivia kept pushing, they'd reconsider the entire partnership. I felt a cold fury rise in me. Olivia and my parents were driving the company off a cliff, and no one seemed to care. I sat in my small apartment one evening, surrounded by stacks of documents, emails, and notes I'd been gathering for weeks. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about principle, about standing up to a family that had decided I was expendable, about exposing the person who'd wormed her way into everything I'd built. Olivia had crossed the line, and I knew it. But I also knew I couldn't just storm back in with accusations and demands. I had to be methodical. I had to be smarter. First, I needed to understand exactly how far Olivia had gone. I couldn't rely on secondhand accounts anymore. So I quietly reached out to a few trusted contacts, old clients, suppliers, and even some employees who had been let go or marginalized under her reign. Some were hesitant to talk, worried about reprisals. But others opened up. One former manager, Lisa, who had been pushed out in the first few months, sent me a folder full of internal emails and memos. They showed Olivia micromanaging to an absurd degree, cutting corners on production, and even bending the truth about delivery dates to clients. Lisa wrote in a note, "I kept copies because I thought I might need them one day. It's worse than you think." With each new piece of information, I felt a mix of anger and vindication. This wasn't just incompetence, it was reckless, and it was deliberate. Olivia was jeopardizing everything to feed her ego and control. The next step was my parents. I called Dad first. My voice was steady but firm. "Dad, I've got information that I think you need to see. It's about Olivia's management." There was silence on the other end. Then a low, wary, "What kind of information?" "I have documents, emails, reports from clients and suppliers. They show serious problems that could ruin the company." He hesitated. "Nathan, Olivia is in charge now. I don't want you stirring up trouble." "That's exactly the problem, Dad. I'm not stirring up trouble. I'm trying to stop it." He ended the call. I tried Mom next, but it was no better. She was cold and dismissive. "Nathan, this isn't your fight anymore. You need to move on." They were in denial. Or worse, complicit. That pushed me further. If my own parents refused to listen, I'd have to take a different approach. I began planning quietly. I contacted a lawyer just to understand my options. Though I had walked away, my name was still on some company documents. More importantly, I wanted to make sure I could legally protect myself if I chose to act. At the same time, I started meeting with the few remaining senior staff members who still cared about the company. Jack was my closest ally. We talked for hours about what had happened and what we could do. Jack said, "We have to be careful. Olivia's ruthless. She won't hesitate to sabotage you if she thinks you're a threat." That was when the idea took shape, to expose Olivia's mismanagement in a way that my parents could no longer ignore. I knew that if the board of directors, a small, close-knit group, saw the facts clearly, they would have to intervene. My parents might still try to protect her, but the other directors had a duty to the company. I compiled everything: the emails, the client complaints, the supplier warnings, the financial reports showing wasteful spending and declining revenue. I also included testimonials from employees who had resigned or been fired unfairly. One night, I sent a detailed, professionally formatted report to the entire board. No emotional language, just facts and evidence. I waited. At first, there was silence. Then, one of the more level-headed board members, a woman named Claire, called me. "Nathan, I reviewed your report. It's troubling. We need to talk." Within days, the board convened an emergency meeting. Olivia was blindsided. She had no idea this was coming. Meanwhile, the family drama exploded. When Mom found out about the report, she confronted me with tears and accusations. "How could you betray us like this? Olivia is family now. You're tearing us apart." Dad was quieter, but no less disappointed. "This is your choice, Nathan. You're making enemies where none needed to exist." After months of careful maneuvering, things were coming to a head. Tessa's carefully curated image was in tatters. The local news had picked up the story of the charity's mismanagement, sparking outrage among donors and community members alike. Several board members resigned, and an official investigation was underway. I wasn't done yet. This was the moment to strike a little deeper, not with loud accusations, but with quiet reminders that I was the daughter my parents once knew, and Tessa was the villain who stole years from all of us. One chilly Saturday afternoon, I received an unexpected message from my mother. It wasn't an apology or an invitation. It was a request for a family meeting. I knew what that meant. They were rattled and scrambling. Julian and I arrived at my parents' modest house, a place I hadn't stepped foot in for nearly a decade. My heart was calm, but my mind was sharp. I wasn't going there to beg for acceptance. I was going to set the record straight, once and for all. Mom and Dad sat stiffly at the kitchen table, Cole beside them, looking uneasy but silent. Tessa was noticeably absent, likely advised to keep away until the storm passed. I greeted them all politely and took a seat. I started slowly, recounting memories from my childhood, the good ones, the ones my parents had tried to forget. I spoke about my struggles, not with bitterness, but with a clarity they hadn't seen before. I wasn't the greedy, selfish person you were told I was, I said calmly. I was the daughter who wanted to be loved and accepted, but instead was pushed away by lies. They looked away, uncomfortable. Then, I laid out everything I discovered about Tessa, the manipulation, the lies, the cruelty behind her smile. I showed them documents, articles, and even messages from Sarah, the former employee who had bravely come forward. I watched as the walls they had built around their beliefs began to crack. Mom's voice trembled. I didn't know it was this bad. Dad's eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of regret. Cole's jaw clenched. I didn't soften. You should have known, but you chose to believe the convenient story. You let her poison this family because it suited you. There was silence, heavy and suffocating. I made it clear then that I wasn't there to patch things up or pretend the past didn't hurt. I'm not interested in forgiveness, I said firmly. I'm interested in moving forward, without Tessa's lies controlling my life or this family. I told them Julian and I would continue building our life together, away from the drama and the toxic shadows they had cast. Mom's face fell, but she said nothing. The investigation into Tessa's charity continued, and she was forced to resign publicly. Her reputation in the community was shattered. The family that once rallied around her began to distance themselves, embarrassed and wary. Cole, who had stood silently by, started avoiding family events altogether. His loyalty to Tessa fractured as her world crumbled. My parents, meanwhile, remained stuck in their guilt and silence. They never reached out again, but their attitude toward me softened slightly in social circles, less cold, but never warm. Julian and I moved into a new home last year, a place filled with laughter and quiet strength. I run my own small business now, one built on integrity and hard work, far from the shadow of my old family. I'm no longer the girl who needed their approval. I'm the woman who reclaimed her story on her terms. Tessa's smug smile disappeared that day at the coffee shop because she finally realized the game had changed. She thought she could silence me with rumors and manipulation. Instead, I used truth, patience, and quiet determination to show her for what she really was, a villain who thrived on tearing others down to build herself up. And in the end, the family she controlled? They saw through her too late. I don't hate my family. I just refuse to let them treat me like I'm disposable. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't yelling or revenge plots. It's walking away with your head held high in a life that can never take away. But it was too late. The board wasn't willing to ignore the evidence. They launched an independent audit and began talking seriously about replacing Olivia as CEO. The company's reputation was already damaged. News of the lost major client had leaked, and rumors about internal chaos spread through the industry. Olivia was desperate. She confronted me in the parking lot after a board meeting one afternoon. You think you're the hero? You're ruining everything. Maybe the company would be better off without you. I looked her in the eye. I'm trying to save it. From you. That confrontation was the breaking point. Over the next few weeks, the audit uncovered more and more issues, inflated expenses, questionable contracts, and even some personal use of company funds disguised as business expenses. My parents couldn't hide behind denial anymore. Olivia's grip was slipping, and the truth was out. But as Olivia's power declined, her behavior became even more erratic. She lashed out at anyone she saw as a threat, the board members, employees, even my family. She tried to manipulate Marcus into siding with her against me, but Marcus was too wrapped up in his own world to get involved. One night, I received a text from Jack. Olivia's planning something drastic. Be careful. The weeks following the audit were the most tense and exhausting of my life. Olivia, once untouchable, was unraveling before my eyes, but instead of accepting defeat, she became more dangerous. I could see it in her eyes, desperation twisted into something darker. She started spreading rumors. At the office, whispers floated that I was scheming to take the company for myself, that I wanted to destroy what my parents had built out of spite. At family gatherings, Olivia worked tirelessly to paint me as the villain, convincing my parents to cut ties with me completely. Mom's demeanor shifted from cold distance to outright hostility. When I tried to call or visit, she hung up or slammed the door in my face. Dad stopped returning my messages entirely. Meanwhile, the board moved quickly. They couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence. The extravagant expenses Olivia had authorized, the lost clients, the toxic work environment she had created. One by one, the directors voiced their concerns during meetings, and by the end of the month, Olivia was formally removed as CEO. She was given a severance package, but the company was eager to distance itself from her mismanagement and scandals. With Olivia gone, the board appointed an interim CEO, someone with a solid reputation and no family ties. Jack was offered a senior leadership role to help stabilize the company. I stayed out of the day-to-day operations. I had learned my lesson about trust and family. This wasn't my battle anymore. But the damage had already been done. The company's reputation took years to rebuild. Major clients left, and some employees who had been loyal for decades moved on. Profits took a hit, and the stress weighed heavily on everyone involved. I watched from the sidelines as the company slowly clawed its way back to stability, thanks to the efforts of people who truly cared, not because of family drama or entitled egos. As for my parents, the distance between us became a canyon impossible to cross. Dad rarely answered my calls, and when he did, his voice was stiff and cold. He refused to acknowledge the role Olivia had played in the downfall. Instead, he blamed me for creating unnecessary conflict and insisted that they had only wanted what was best for the company. Mom's bitterness was even worse. She sided fully with Olivia, defending her until the bitter end. I heard from relatives that she had told family members I was ungrateful and had abandoned the family legacy for personal gain. Marcus, my brother, stayed comfortably neutral, too absorbed in his own world to intervene. I'm convinced he was relieved the conflict wasn't his problem. Olivia? She vanished from the industry almost overnight. I later heard she tried to start a new business, but without my family's backing and the taint of her past mismanagement, it failed quickly. The last I heard, she moved to another state, starting fresh but carrying the weight of her failures and the bridges she had burned. The worst part? My parents never apologized. They never admitted they were wrong to give control to someone so clearly unqualified and toxic. They never reached out to mend fences. The family that should have supported me instead turned their backs. It hurt deeply, but it also taught me something invaluable. Sometimes, family isn't about blood or legacy. Sometimes, it's about who shows up when it counts and who's willing to let you go when it's easier. I walked away from the company, the business, and the family drama with my head held high. I built a new career from the ground up, one based on my own values, integrity, and hard work. The legacy I'd hoped to protect wasn't lost. It was just reborn in a different form, away from entitlement and toxicity. I don't regret standing up for what was right, even if it meant losing my family in the process. Because sometimes, the biggest victory is knowing you didn't sell out your principles, no matter the cost. And that's where things stand now. The company is healing. Olivia is a cautionary tale. My parents remain estranged. And I'm finally free.